Okay, everyone, we have reached the bottom of the hour, so let's get started with today's L10 webinar, Building Long-Term Memory in Your Salesforce, What Works and Why, sponsored by Tipping Point Media. My name is Tim Sosby. I'm Editorial Director for L10. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's program. I'm going to start here with some housekeeping items, including how you can interact with our speakers today. We are planning a 30-minute session for you today. So your phones are on mute. Any questions or comments you have, please do type them into the questions feature on the control panel there on the right side of your screen. Just type in the questions or comments while they're fresh in your mind as they occur to you. We will try to get to them throughout today's program or in Q&A at the end or for follow-up offline. But either way, please do let us hear from you when you have a question or a comment throughout today's webinar. Also on that control panel, I wanted to point out the handouts window. There are several items in there you may wish to download. We have some items in there from L10 and also some items in there from our sponsors today, Tipping Point Media. They can tell you more about their items as we go through today's program, but you can download any or all of these. Just highlight the title. It'll walk you through downloading to your desktop. And if you have any questions or any issues with any of these, you can reach out to me at my email address here, and I'll be happy to connect you with the handouts offline as well. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand in the L10 Self-Directed Learning Library. We're going to send you an email about an hour after today's webinar ends with a link to that recording. It'll be in that Self-Directed Learning Library even sooner than that. So one way or the other, please do look for that recording. Feel free to share with your colleagues and certainly check back as you need to for any refreshers or whatnot. And speaking of sharing, as you leave today's webinar, a follow-up survey is going to appear in a separate browser window. Please do take a moment when you leave, look for that survey, and quickly share your thoughts with us. And finally, again, there's my email address. If I can help with anything around today's webinar or your L10 member experience, certainly don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our speakers today. You're going to be hearing from Jessica Angove. Jessica is Director of Experiential Learning at Tipping Point Media, and Evan Yeager. Evan is a Solution Strategist for Tipping Point Media. I'm going to turn things over to Evan and Jessica to take it away from here. Evan and Jessica, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Tim. Hey, everyone. For starters, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the second official day of fall. In the next half hour, we're going to kick things off by taking a deeper dive into learning about learning. And to be more specific, understanding how learners in your sales force retain or don't retain the content that they are exposed to. Next, we're going to walk you through some of the evidence-based foundational strategies that address learner retention. And then finally, we're going to walk through a real-life example that we've designed that effectively builds long-term memory in a sales force. And just so that you can put a face to a name, I wanted to start out with some introductions. My name is Evan Yeager. I'm one of the solution strategists at Tipping Point Media, and I started working at Tipping Point Media in August of last year. But you could say that education and training has pretty much molded my career. From my time in the military as a fire support specialist leading a fire team to my degree in secondary education as a teacher, learning is a topic that I am extremely passionate about, and I'm really excited to speak with you all today.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Angove, and I'm the Director of Experiential Learning here at Tipping Point Media. It's hard for me to believe, but I'm approaching my 10-year anniversary of entering the field of instructional design, and a majority of my career has been spent in the healthcare industry. Prior to Tipping Point Media, I worked for a large academic healthcare facility in the Philadelphia area, and just about 6 years ago, I came to Tipping Point, where I've been able to continue that work in partnering with several pharmaceutical and medical device companies to design and develop really innovative and effective learning solutions. So I'm excited to share some of that with you today. Thank you for joining us.
I mentioned earlier that we're going to start grassroots here. And so learning about learning starts with identifying how we learn. The logical starting place for this is going to be looking at our memory. After all, learning is defined as the acquisition of knowledge or skills through experience, study, or by being taught. Another word that we have for that process of acquisition is our memory. Since Hermann Ebbinghaus's 1885 book first coined the term the forgetting curve, teachers and trainers, and it probably goes without saying that we can safely throw parents on this list too, They've been trying to understand exactly why people forget. And then also, how do we help them remember information that they need when they actually need it? As you can see, the retention of information presented to a learner decays exponentially. In fact, without any reinforcement, you're only going to remember about 10% of any given training in less than a week. So, in the quest to building long-term memory, now that we've identified that it's a problem, we have to start by asking the question, why do we forget? And the answer is actually surprisingly simple. Allow me to highlight some of the common culprits of forgetfulness. First, our brains are hardwired to filter out unimportant details. There's like this hierarchy of importance that's programmed into your brain. And this is specific to the way that you attribute value to new information. Things that you view as important, like your computer password or your phone number, these take up memory in your brain. So there's not enough space for like what you had for dinner last Tuesday, or that email that you were supposed to send a week ago to what's his name. And second, our brains also forget things strategically. But honestly, that's probably not the excuse you want to use when you forget like a significant other's birthday. Believe it or not, it's actually hardwired into our biology. It's a survival strategy that keeps us from being overwhelmed by trivial information that could drown out important items that contribute to your survival. And lastly, we forget things to preserve our mental health, because actually the ability to forget allows people to recover from traumatic experiences. So believe it or not, it's harder to pinpoint the stuff that we forget versus what we remember. So then that begs the question, what do we remember then? We remember things that are repetitious. This could be like a commercial or a song. And here's an example of this that I'd like to share. The J.G. Wentworth jingle. So I actually worked at J.G. Wentworth, and while I worked there, we would routinely have people call in, even years after seeing our ad, simply because they remembered the phone number. And it's funny because the ad still runs today, and to this day, anyone who's experienced this ad even one time will remember the jingle and thus remember the phone number. We also can recall things very easily that are iconic. Take, for instance, popular movie quotes. They're extremely easy to remember. There are even some people who boast the ability to recall movies line by line. That being said, I'm definitely not one of those people. But most people can recall specific lines from popular movies even after only seeing the movie a single time. Take, for example, in Toy Story, when Buzz Lightyear says the line, "To infinity and beyond." It's only a 4-letter quote, but it resonates with the viewer so much that even decades later, it's easily recalled. So we've identified that repetition has something to do with it too. Think of repetitious memories like nursery rhymes. These are extremely easy to remember, and they're often some of our first memories. And when we pair rhythm, rhymes, and melodies with simple phrases, it increases the likelihood that we are to remember information. And even though this list is certainly not exhaustive, we also remember the information that interests us. This sounds really obvious, but this is the really important information that we remember. Think about the stuff that we're invested in, like our hobbies or self-motivated learning. For instance, I like to ride and work on my mountain bike. And so it's really, really easy for me to recall specific pressures that I keep in the tires as I head down the mountain, or like the length of a given trail. It's because I'm cognitively invested in that information. So when thinking about strategy, it's important to recognize the different types of information that we remember, because it's also going to point to the how part of our memory. Really, the golden ticket to developing learning that is impactful and resonates with the learner is finding ways to reach that learner. And so that begins with employing the different types of memory strategies, which we're going to talk about soon. The caveat to this is that it's really not an easy task, and it can have consequences that are detrimental to the goals of learning. Unfortunately, the largest consequence of delivering training that is designed improperly is that it's not going to stick with the learner. And we recognize that this essentially makes the training useless. And even still, there are factors that cannot be controlled. For instance, when a learner is not paying attention. Think about watching TV back in the seemingly medieval times before Netflix or recorded TV. Basically, when you missed a show or when you didn't flip back fast enough after a commercial break, you didn't get to see that little bit of the show or movie. And so the same premise applies with learning. If the learner does not pay attention to what's being delivered, whether it be that they didn't see the value or that they were presented with too much, or maybe just thinking about something else entirely, there's no real way to retain that training. And that's simply because it never made it to their brain to be remembered in the first place. And let's talk about interference. Interference is what happens when your brain is basically pressed for storage space. In short, new information can override prior training and vice versa. A great example of interference is when learning a new language as an adult. And let me share my quick example for this. For the last 3 months, I have been working on becoming more fluent in Spanish. But having English as my first language makes it extremely difficult to learn vocabulary that doesn't follow the similar rules. And so I struggle with pronunciation and understanding because my understanding of English supersedes my understanding of my target language, Spanish. The practical way to put it is that new information that opposes our a priori knowledge, or the knowledge that we have prior to learning, is not as easily remembered as information that aligns with what we've learned before. And finally, we've all fallen victim to decay or disuse. It's the reason we can sometimes feel rusty when doing something. We use the terminology of decay because training requires routine reinforcement to re-engage content. Training decays as we let it sit idle in our mind. Decay also occurs when you haven't had the opportunity to use a specific skill that you've learned. And many organizations already recognize this. For instance, if you think about certifications, they're usually only valid for a certain period of time. And that's because the skill may not be used in everyday life. The American Red Cross requires recertification for CPR training every 2 years, as an example. There are a lot of factors and obstacles that affect how a learner retains information. And thankfully, there are methods that we're going to share about delivering training that addresses many of these challenges. And it's also helpful to keep training centered on the primary goal of training, which is that learners will recall the information when they actually need it. In designing training, our goal is to target skills that we want learners to leverage on the job, and then we build platforms to teach, reinforce, and provide opportunities for them to use those skills.
So, what are some of the strategies we can use to design training that will make it to your learner's long-term memory and surpass this forgetting curve? First, let's think about our learners. When it comes to receiving information, the theory of learning styles suggests that people have a preferred way to learn. This theory sorts people into one of 4 categories: those who learn best visually, those who prefer to learn by listening, those who learn best by reading or writing, and those who prefer kinesthetic or learn by doing experiences. This theory that everyone has a preferred learning style became popular in the 90s, but it's been widely debunked in recent years and has become somewhat of a controversial topic in the instructional design community. Instead, what's gaining popularity and proving to be effective is the theory of multisensory learning, which says that everyone benefits from a variety of learning modalities, and we remember how to do things best when multiple senses are engaged. So, keeping that in mind, let's look at some of the other design considerations we need to remember when designing training we want learners to commit to their long-term memory. We know from our principles of adult learning that adult learners are focused on achieving their goals, and they need to know how the information is relevant. Like Evan said earlier, we have a limited amount of space in our brains for new information. If the learner doesn't see the value in the training, it might never even make it to their brain in the first place. So we need to be strategic and deliberate with what we present and how it's presented. We also need to consider how we can use repetition to keep the material from decaying in our learner's brain, and specifically, how we can make that repetition impactful. I'll show you later on how unthoughtful repetition can actually have the opposite effect of what we're aiming for. And finally, we need to design training that allows learners to practice their new skills in a safe space and give them an opportunity to make mistakes, reflect on the outcomes, and try again. So let's look at something that many of you probably have extensive experience with: product training and preparing your representatives to have robust customer conversations around your product. Let's think about some of the ways we can use the strategies we've just discussed to engage your reps during training. One of the most common ways to become familiar with a product is reading the PI. But the PI can have a lot of dense information that is difficult to retain and recall, given the overload of technical terms and data about the product. Since we know that adults learn best and retain more information when they're able to discover things for themselves, let's think about how we could design a learning exercise around the PI that would give the learner something to discover, something to do. One idea would be to create a scavenger hunt that asks learners to use the PI in response to physician questions. This activity allows learners to explore the PI and discover the content for themselves. It makes the training relevant by showing reps the kind of questions that physicians will ask and highlights the key information they should take away from the PI. In this example, the learner is presented with a fictional healthcare system where they have to visit several locations and meet with various healthcare professionals. Not only do reps have to be able to answer the HCP's question, but they also have to identify where in the PI the information was found. This requires them to really use and explore the PI and become familiar with its content and its structure. This activity engages multiple senses for the learner, from visually seeing the healthcare campus and the physician, orally hearing the physician narrate the question, reading the PI to find the answers, and tactily by having them navigate the PI and select answer choices. So really aligning with that theory of multisensory learning. Now that our learners have a foundational knowledge of the PI, we need to make sure we provide opportunities to keep it fresh in their minds and prevent it from decaying and falling victim to the dreaded forgetting curve. So how can we do that? One idea would be to give them an opportunity to practice active recall of the information with a virtual reality escape room. Instead of just presenting our learners with something like a multiple choice quiz, what if we engage their senses with a multiplayer competition that allows them to travel inside the body, experience the MOA firsthand, and solve puzzles by answering questions about the PI? With this approach, we're repeating the information, but in a different way. Here, learners aren't simply reciting what they've learned. Instead, they're being asked to actively use the information to answer questions. Their ability to quickly and accurately recall information correlates directly to faster times and higher scores in the escape room. And we know that sales reps love competition. Experiences like this also help to build value and relevance for the learner. When your learners get to travel inside the body and see the MOA of a product firsthand, it reminds them that what they're learning has a purpose. That helps the brain make space for new long-term memory to be built. And we actually have an example of what this might look like that Evan's going to share with you now.
Thanks, Jess. Now let's take a look at an example of a virtual reality escape room. What you're about to see is what the learner sees as he or she will enter the escape room. You'll notice as we begin, there are other learners in the room. This is a multiplayer experience. Having a social learning experience is extremely important, and this escape room allows for collaboration and competition of up to 8 players. As we begin the experience, you'll see that the learners are exposed to specific tasks. The objectives of these tasks are to reinforce the product information. In this case, the prescribing information. Our learner is tasked with answering critical assessments associated with the PI. Do you see the timer in the top center? The learner is being awarded points based off of the accuracy of their answer and the speed at which they answer those questions. In this escape room, we're using an analogy of a ship that is traveling through the body to motivate the learners with a scenario. The ship encounters issues, and so the learners must problem solve. In this mini task, our learner is acting as the MOA, and these seemingly ancillary tasks are combined with the content recall tasks to make the environment engaging for the learner. Pairing experiential knowledge with content reinforcement in the escape room creates a highly effective learning environment.
Thanks, Evan. Again, this is a really cool way to get that active recall practice while engaging your learners in something different, something fun, and something they'll remember. Finally, we need to give our learners an opportunity to practice what they've learned. Based on the theory of in-context learning, we know that the environment in which you study will become part of your association with the material that you're studying. And so an example of this, there was a study done, and I was not able to track down the original source, but at an e-learning guild conference several years ago, Julie Dirksen, she's the author of the book Design for How People Learn, she gave a presentation where she explained that in this study, people who lit a vanilla scented candle while they studied and then lit that same candle while they took the test scored higher than those in the control group who didn't have that study to test association. And so what that tells us is whenever possible, you want to encode the information in the same type of environment where learners will be retrieving it. In our case, that would be the doctor's office. But this isn't always easy. You can't just take a class of new reps into a doctor's office for the day. However, augmented reality technology allows us to simulate the physical setting by putting the learner in a 3D office space. They can literally walk through the physician's door and come face to face with the doctor. It's about as close to reality as we can get. In addition to simulating the physical environment, it's also important to consider the emotional context. In training, the rep is usually in a calm, controlled environment, but in front of a doctor, they might be nervous or anxious. The doctor might be rushing them or be unfriendly. AR is a great tool for setting this context as well. We could use a frustration meter to track the doctor's annoyance rising each time the learner answers a question incorrectly. And the reaction from the 3D avatar also helps simulate the stress level that a rep might feel during an actual office visit. Emotional context can be one of the more difficult contexts to replicate, but augmented reality really lends itself to this type of solution. And now Evan's going to show you what something like this could look like in augmented reality.
Now I want to take the time to walk you through an example of how we use augmented reality to train a learner. In this case, it's a sales rep with the learning objective of having to speak with a doctor in the doctor's office. The first thing our sales rep in training is tasked with doing is setting up the room. We want to recreate the environment that the rep will be selling in. With augmented reality, the reps are given the chance to recreate a scenario that they would experience in the field. Once they place the door on the floor, they can literally step into the doctor's office. As the rep enters the room, you'll notice that there's a patient in the room. This is the standard for what we would probably see in the field as sales reps. To help develop the soft skills of conversation, there's also a microphone where the rep can record themselves speaking before speaking with the doctor. Once the rep begins the conversation with the doctor, they're experiencing in-context learning. Usually this happens in the field, but mistakes in the field can't be undone, and they can cost the rep a relationship. As the rep speaks with Helen, they practice verbalization by physically speaking into the microphone. The programming recognizes the response, and Helen, our patient, talks to the rep about the subjects that are relative to her life and the symptoms that she experiences. Conversations with doctors are different than conversations with patients, and Helen tells the rep about her life outside of her disease. This is an effective way to anchor knowledge in emotional connections. In the next portion of the experience, the rep's speaking with one of the doctors. The doctor asks the rep questions about the product, and the rep must draw on their product knowledge to answer the questions correctly. The rep has a portfolio of quick reference material that they can cite or consult to help aid them in this conversation. Did you get a chance to see the frustration meter at the bottom of the screen? The frustration meter measures the frustration of the HCP as the rep answers questions. This also exposes reps to objections that they may see in the field. The unique part about using augmented reality is that this training can be deployed anywhere, and the rep can enter or leave the conversation at any point. The sales simulator incorporates all three design strategies by presenting relevant information through charts and materials, building repetition by verbally engaging with the scenarios, and it also provides the opportunity for reps to practice these newly developed skills.
So at this point, your rep should have a solid understanding of your product and how to transfer that knowledge to do their job effectively. Each learning program we looked at today appeals to multiple senses, making it easier for learners to remember and recall the information. In addition, with each activity, we're repeating information in a meaningful way, leaning on a technique common in advertising called repetition with variation. In this technique, repeated ads contain slight variations in order to optimize their effectiveness and prevent advertising wear out. The same is true for repetition in learning. While repetition is good for building long-term memory, presenting the same information in the same way can cause learner wear out. By varying the activities and spacing out the repetition in the learning experience, learners are able to retain and recall more information about the product and feel confident to have those robust conversations with their customers.
I want to thank everyone again so much for joining us today. Before we dive into the Q&A portion of this webinar, I just wanted to recap everything that we've discussed during this session. Today, we learned about how learners remember information. We also learned about the instructional design strategies that can be deployed to increase retention and decrease decay or memory loss. And finally, we walked you through some examples of these strategies hard at work. Our goal is that this session will serve you as you look to develop training for your sales reps in the very near future. We'll now open up the presentation for any questions or comments. And I just want to add that if you'd like to send a private or specific question or comment to Jessica or myself, you can also reach out at the email that's on the screen.
So the first question we have here is, how easy is it to update the escape room with custom content?
Well, thanks so much for the question. It is very, very easy to update the escape room with custom content. In fact, that's part of the design behind that escape room, is that it would be easy to take whatever content that you are sharing with your reps or training your reps in and put it into the escape room. So that actually cuts down on the time that it takes to implement a finished escape room.
Another question here, how long does it take to customize and deploy the sales simulator?
So with the sales simulator, because that is going to be unique to whatever the product is that you're training these reps in, that is one that is going to be a little bit more open-ended, but I can also offer a little bit of insight into the original time period that it took for developing the specific example that we were showing you. So that is going to take anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and that also depends on the product that you're training your reps in.
Okay, we have a lot of questions here. How much would it cost to build such VR activity? I think she meant the escape room.
Yeah, so with the virtual reality escape room, the cost is going to vary. But what I can say is that based off of the time that it takes a learner to travel through the escape room, we have a lot of these already pre-built assets and pre-built activities within the escape room that we can kind of take whatever training that you're transitioning into an escape room and build that up from there. So while I won't be able to tell you an exact cost for it, what I can say is that if you reach out to me, I'd be more than happy to have a meeting with you and discuss that privately.
We have a question here for Jess. How much time should take place between each instance of training completion?
I would say early on, as the information is new to them and they're building that memory, you would want to do it closer together. But then as they're, increasing their knowledge, it's transitioning into their long-term memory, you could space it out further.
Okay. Tim, do we have time for one more?
We do, Lindsay. We can certainly take the questions. Thank you.
Okay. Can you comment on how this could be implemented for a global project with translation challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of our internal team is that we have worked with clients before where we would need to translate experiences for obviously the global team. And I can tell you that from an instructional design standpoint, we also recognize being able to translate these into different cultural experiences as well. So while that doesn't necessarily answer your question in full, I'd be happy to talk with you offline about maybe some of the strategies that we could use to cover the bases for the global audience as well with these experiences.
Well, Evan and Jess, thank you so much. I see we are near the top of the hour. I believe we're at the end of the questions as well. Lindsay, did I miss any questions?
Nope, we got them all.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for helping with that. And everybody, if you do have any additional questions and you're still typing, please do keep typing. Send the questions on in. We will get to them, get you answers offline as well. So if you do have any additional questions, please do send them on in. Or as Evan mentioned, you're welcome to reach out to him and Jess directly at the email showing here. Okay, with all of that said, let me send some final thank yous or send some thank yous. Jess and Evan, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Tim. It's always a pleasure.
Excellent. But just as we close out here, folks, and again, if you're typing, keep typing. I just wanted to share some L10 information with you. This is a quick look at our calendar of events here for the rest of the year, basically the upcoming quarter here. Left in 2021, you see we've got some 60s workshops coming up still, our prime time for trainers courses, core and master courses coming up, and I think most importantly our annual conference, the 50th annual L10 conference will take place November 8th to 11th. It's going to be both virtual and in person at the Gaylord Rockies. So one way or the other, I hope you can join us for that event. Please do check out the L10 website for more information on all of these programs. Here's some more on that conference as well. Again, it's going to be both a virtual and in-person experience. So again, one way or the other, we hope you're there. You can find out more information on L1021 at l10conference.com. And one more thing about the conference, tomorrow is the close for workshops. The call for workshops. So if you're interested in speaking at the conference this year, again, virtually or in person, please do submit your conference proposal, speaking proposal by tomorrow. You can again find out more information on l10conference.com or reach out to any L10 staff member. We can help you with that. With all that said, I'm going to invite you now to your next webinar. I'm going to invite you to join us again on Thursday, September 30th. We'll be talking about accessing growth, leveraging agile prospecting. You can see more programs coming up here as we move into October. You can find even more programs available on the L10 website at l-10.org/webinars. Here's the address for the Self-Directed Learning Library where today's recording is going to be housed shortly. And again, we're going to send you an email about an hour from now with a link to that recording as well. And finally, there's my email address up there. If I can help with anything, certainly don't hesitate to reach out. So with all that said, final thank yous now. I'm going to thank our speakers again, Jessica Angove and Evan Yeager. Jess and Evan, again, thank you both very much. And I'm going to thank Tipping Point Media for sponsoring today's program. And I'm going to thank all of you for your time, attention, and participation today. Let me wish you a good rest of your day, a good rest of your week, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.